For countless centuries, the Galactic Empire had dominated the known universe with an unyielding hand, crushing any who dared to oppose its iron grip. Its fleets, vast and unrelenting, scoured the stars, quelling resistance and imposing its order on every corner of the galaxy. The Empire's technology was far beyond anything any species could fathom, a mixture of ancient secrets and cutting-edge science, and its warships were feared by all who looked up at the night sky. At the heart of this empire was its emperor, a being of immense power and ambition, determined to make sure the galaxy stayed under his control forever. His reign seemed unshakable, with thousands of planets enslaved and trillions of beings bound by the weight of his empire's will. But for all its might, something stirred in the depths of the galaxy, something the Empire had never expected, something human. The human race had been in the Empire's radar for some time, but at first they seemed insignificant, an emerging species on a small, insignificant planet. No one in the Empire thought they posed any real threat. Humanity, still new to the stars, had managed to secure a few colonies and trade routes, but they were far from a match for the Empire's mighty fleets. The humans had no real superweapons, no great armies, and no advanced fleets to compare with the Empire's. But beneath the surface of their apparent weakness, something remarkable was taking shape. It was not technology that made the humans unique. It was something else, an unwavering spirit. The will to survive, to fight against overwhelming odds, was something the Empire had never encountered before. And they didn't even realize it. The Empire's leaders, in their arrogance, thought they had all of the time in the world. The human race was too primitive, too scattered, too weak to ever challenge their reign. The Imperial fleet, with its battle-hardened commanders, were so confident in their superiority that they barely considered humanity a threat. They were right to some extent, of course. Humanity's fleets were small and inexperienced, their ships slow and unrefined in comparison to the Empire's massive warships. But what the Empire failed to understand was the sheer determination of the human spirit. And that, they would soon learn, was something no fleet or weapon could ever anticipate. The first signs that something was different came from the human colony on Aloria, a world on the very edge of the Empire's controlled territories. A small mining world with a population of barely a few million, it seemed like an insignificant blip on the Imperial maps. But then came the messages. Rumors spread that the humans had begun to organize, to resist. At first, the Empire laughed it off. The local governors sent in a few ships to remind the humans of their place. But then those ships started disappearing. One by one, Imperial vessels, heavily armed and seemingly invincible, went silent. Communications were cut off. Some returned damaged, their crewmen visibly shaken, with no explanation for what had happened. Imperial command could no longer ignore it. Something was happening on Aloria, something that was changing the galaxy. It was then that the first real shock hit. A mysterious new human battleship, something never seen before, arrived at the Imperial blockade around the Aloria system. It was unlike anything the Empire had seen, fast, deadly, and far more advanced than any human ship had any right to be. The Valor, as it was called, was a symbol of human ingenuity. Its weapons systems were unknown, its shields impenetrable. In its first engagement, it tore through an Imperial destroyer like a hot knife through butter. For the first time in centuries, the Empire faced an adversary that could match their might. The news of the Valor's attack spread quickly, and soon, whispers of other human ships and battles began to surface. The Empire could no longer ignore the rising tide of human defiance. Admiral Isabel Hawke, the captain of the Valor, had once been a brilliant tactician in the Empire's own ranks. A former Imperial officer who had grown disillusioned with the Empire's cruelty, she had defected years before, joining the human resistance. Under her command, the humans had learned to fight smarter, not harder. Their ships may have been smaller, but they were nimble and highly maneuverable. They lacked the firepower of the Empire's dreadnoughts, but they had something the Empire had forgotten: flexibility. They had the element of surprise. They had the will to fight for freedom. And most importantly, they had each other. Hawke knew that this was just the beginning. The Empire was about to face a threat unlike anything it had ever imagined. The Imperial response was swift, But in the face of human ingenuity, it was clumsy. The Empire sent a fleet of warships to crush the Valor and any other human ships in the system. The thought was simple: overrun the humans with overwhelming force, obliterate them before they could rise to become a real threat. What they didn't know was that the humans had already anticipated their moves. Hawk and her crew, operating from the shadows of the galaxy, launched a series of lightning-fast raids on the Imperial fleet. They struck at supply lines, crippled entire fleets, and sabotaged Imperial infrastructure. The Empire's mighty warships, designed to dominate and intimidate, were being outplayed at every turn. But the true horror of the Empire's mistake came when they tried to deploy their greatest weapon, the Eviscerator, a warship of unimaginable power, a ship designed to crush entire fleets in one strike. The Eviscerator had destroyed dozens of systems, and the Empire believed it would be the final solution to the human problem. Yet, as it entered the Eloria system to face the Valor, it met with something unexpected. Instead of a decisive battle, what followed was a series of ambushes, traps, and relentless assaults that tore the Eviscerator apart from the inside. The humans had done what no one thought possible. They had turned the Empire's greatest weapon against itself. As the first engagement ended, the Empire found itself at a crossroads. For the first time in their long history, they realized that something had changed. The humans were no longer just a nuisance. They were a threat, one that was growing stronger by the day. And in the depths of the Empire's war room, a single question echoed: how could a species so new, so insignificant, have done what no one else could? And as that question hung in the air, the answer began to sink in. The Empire had underestimated humanity, not their technology, not their numbers, but their spirit. And that, it turned out, was something the Empire could never break. The quiet of the Eloria system was shattered when the Empire's mighty fleet arrived, a show of strength so immense that it seemed to eclipse the very stars. Imperial warships, sleek and powerful, moved into position above the planet's orbit, their engines humming with the energy of countless engines. The humans had been bold to challenge the Empire's rule, but the Empire had never lost a battle. The Imperial commanders, confident in their victory, knew this would be a short and decisive operation. No one had ever survived the might of the Empire's fleets for long. The humans would break like all others, bowing to the superiority of the Empire's might. But Admiral Isabel Hawke was no ordinary commander, and the humans under her command were no ordinary soldiers. They had learned to fight with the heart of warriors, fueled by an unbreakable desire for freedom. As the first ships of the Empire descended upon the Eloria system, the humans prepared for the greatest battle of their existence. The heart of the human fleet. The Valor stood proud, its gleaming hull reflecting the light of distant stars. The ship had been designed for one purpose: to take on the Empire's might and survive. Every inch of the Valor was engineered to outmaneuver the Empire's lumbering behemoths. Hawke had learned from the first skirmishes with the Empire that the key was not brute strength, but speed, surprise, and agility. She had studied the tactics of the Empire's greatest commanders, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, and their arrogance. They believed they were untouchable, and Hawke planned to use that against them. As the enemy ships entered the system, she gave the command. "Prepare to engage," she said calmly, her voice betraying no fear. Her crew responded with practiced precision, knowing this battle would define not just the fate of Eloria, but the fate of the human race. As the first wave of Imperial ships came into range, the human fleet scattered, breaking formation. The Empire's commanders were confused at first. This was not the standard human approach. The Valor and its companions split into smaller groups, weaving and darting through the stars, as if anticipating the Imperial strategy before it even began. The Empire's fleet was slow to respond, too used to having the luxury of overwhelming force. They opened fire, their massive cannons charging up with lethal energy, but the humans were already on the move. The first salvo missed by miles, as human ships ducked and dived through space, their maneuvering thrusters allowing them to twist and turn with unnatural speed. The Empire's commanders barked orders, trying to form up and surround the human ships, but it was clear that the humans had already disrupted their strategy. The Valor led the charge, its weapons firing with deadly accuracy as it engaged the nearest Imperial cruiser, the Thunderclap. The battle was not what the Empire had expected. The humans, with their smaller, more nimble ships, used guerrilla tactics that threw the Imperial fleet into chaos. The Valor fired a series of precision shots that tore into the Thunderclap's shields, creating a breach that allowed the human ships to slip in and deliver devastating blows to the ship's vulnerable systems. The massive Imperial vessel shuddered, its energy systems flickering as the human ships moved away with breathtaking speed, almost before the Empire could react. It was the first real indication that the humans were no longer helpless in the face of the Empire's might. The Imperial fleet scrambled, trying to regroup, but the humans were relentless, striking in quick bursts, attacking ships at their weakest points. For every Imperial cruiser that took aim, there were 2 or 3 human ships already gone, leaving only the wreckage of their victims. The battle raged for hours, with the Empire losing ship after ship, unable to adapt to the lightning-fast tactics of the humans. Hawk had been right. Speed, not strength, was the key. The Valor was the heart of the human resistance, and under Hawk's command, it moved like a predator, striking with the precision of a surgeon. Every shot from the Valor landed where it mattered, disabling Imperial warships one by one. But the Empire was not one to fall so easily. They had prepared for this very possibility, and soon reinforcements began to arrive, massive warships that dwarfed anything the humans had ever seen. The Empire had brought in their heavy artillery, their destroyers, and dreadnoughts, their answer to the human rebellion. Now the humans would see what it meant to challenge the might of the Empire. But even as the Empire's reinforcements arrived, the humans did not falter. They knew that they were up against overwhelming odds, but it didn't matter. They had tasted victory, and that hunger only grew. The Valor and its fleet darted in and out of the larger Imperial ships, making them work for every shot. The humans were not afraid of dying. They had no choice but to fight. Hawk's voice rang out across the command deck, her calm demeanor hiding the intensity of the situation. We don't stop. We don't give up. We keep pushing them until they can't fight anymore. And that's exactly what they did. For every one human ship that was lost, 10 more took its place. The human fleet, a living, breathing entity that refused to be crushed. They were a force of nature, not an army. And that was the strength that the Empire could not understand. Hours turned into a day, and the Empire's losses mounted. The human ships, though fewer in number, continued to strike with precision, forcing the Empire to adjust their strategies again and again. The humans had become an unstoppable force in their own right, a thorn in the Empire's side that refused to be ignored. And then, just when the battle seemed to be tipping in favor of the humans, the Empire deployed its secret weapon, the Abyssal Dawn, a battleship so advanced that even the human fleet's best efforts seemed puny in comparison. The ship entered the fray with a thunderous roar, its massive cannons firing with the power to destroy entire fleets. The Abyssal Dawn was everything the Empire had hoped for, a symbol of their unassailable power. But the humans weren't done yet. Admiral Hawk knew this was just the beginning, and they couldn't back down now. She ordered a full retreat, a temporary measure to regroup. The battle wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The Abyssal Dawn may have been a terrifying sight, but it also represented the Empire's desperation. The humans had proven their worth, and the war was no longer a one-sided affair. For the first time, the Empire was on the defensive. And the human resistance, now emboldened by their first victory, was ready for the next phase of the war. The Empire had underestimated them once, but now they would never make that mistake again. The Empire had never experienced anything like it. The human resistance, once considered a mere nuisance, had grown into a full-fledged nightmare. With each passing day, the rebellion gained strength, and its leader, Admiral Isabel Hawk, became a symbol of defiance that could no longer be ignored. The Empire, once confident in its unchallenged supremacy, was now reeling from a series of humiliating defeats. A fleet that had been designed to crush planets with a single strike was struggling against ships that were smaller, faster, and infinitely more cunning. Hawk's tactics, once thought to be unpredictable, had turned the tide in ways that left the Empire's commanders scrambling for answers. And now, the human resistance was stronger than ever. Word had spread across the galaxy, word of the Valor, of Admiral Hawk's cunning, and of humanity's ability to fight against the odds. The Empire's stronghold was crumbling, and the spark of rebellion was lighting up every corner of the galaxy. Once enslaved species were rising up, joining the human cause, and the imperial governors that had once ruled with an iron fist were now finding themselves under siege by their own people. The Empire had failed to put down the rebellion, and now they were facing a force that had spread too far, too quickly to be contained. But even with all their losses, the Emperor remained resolute. The thought of losing his reign was unthinkable. The Empire had existed for millennia, and it would not fall to a ragtag group of rebels, no matter how resourceful they were. He ordered one final solution: an end to the human resistance and to anyone who dared to follow them. The Emperor's plan was brutal and final. He would send his most powerful fleet to annihilate the human fleet once and for all. This fleet would not just be a show of force, it would be the last word in the Empire's dominance. It would carry with it the most advanced warships ever created, dreadnoughts, destroyers, and the ultimate weapon, the Oblivion, a battleship so powerful that it could erase entire star systems from existence. This fleet would be the end of humanity's hope, the crushing blow that would wipe out the rebellion in a single, decisive strike. The Emperor had grown tired of the constant struggle, and he had one final, chilling message to deliver to the human rebels. Resistance was futile. As the Imperial fleet advanced toward the Outer Rim, Admiral Hawk knew what was coming. She had been preparing for this moment for months, even before the first ship of the Empire had set foot on Eloria. The human fleet had grown stronger in the time since their victory at Eloria, but the Empire's fleet outnumbered them 100-1. The battle ahead would be a gamble, a fight where the odds were so overwhelmingly against them that even Hawk had doubts. But she knew there was no turning back. She had seen the fire in her crew's eyes, the same fire that had burned in her own heart when she first took up the fight. The humans had something the Empire could never understand: an unbreakable will to survive, to fight, to resist. This would be the turning point, or it would be the end. The two fleets met in the cold vacuum of space, an immense battlefield where the fate of the galaxy would be decided. The humans were outmatched, but they were not afraid. They knew the Empire's ships were slow and cumbersome, and they used that to their advantage. Hawk's fleet scattered at the first sign of engagement, darting and weaving through the Imperial lines like shadows in the dark. Their ships, nimble and agile, slipped through the gaps in the enemy's defenses, striking with deadly precision before disappearing into the blackness of space. It was a dance of survival, and every movement mattered. The Empire's fleet fired on instinct, their massive cannons shooting in all directions, but they could not track the agile human ships. The Valor led the charge, cutting through enemy vessels with surgical precision. One by one, the Imperial ships fell, their destruction a testament to the humans' resilience. But despite their best efforts, the Empire's reinforcements kept coming. For every ship the humans destroyed, two more took its place. It was then that the Oblivion appeared, massive, imposing, a shadow that seemed to swallow everything in its path. Its sheer size and power were enough to make even the bravest hearts tremble. The humans had faced heavy odds before, but this was different. The Oblivion wasn't just a warship, it was a symbol of the Empire's arrogance, the final declaration of their will to dominate the galaxy. Its weapons could destroy entire fleets with a single shot, and its shields were nearly impenetrable. Hawk felt a coldness grip her chest as the ship came into view. But she knew she could not afford fear. She had to remain calm. Her crew was counting on her. The fate of the galaxy was hanging in the balance. The battle around the Oblivion was nothing short of catastrophic. The Empire's fleet moved to protect it, creating an impenetrable wall of firepower. The humans' tactics, once so successful, were beginning to falter. Their ships were getting picked off one by one as they tried to break through the blockade. The Valor was damaged but still fighting, its hull scarred from enemy fire. Hawk's crew worked tirelessly, their hands steady, even as the reality of the battle set in. But despite everything, despite the odds stacked against them, the humans refused to give up. In the darkest moments of the battle, when it seemed like all hope was lost, Hawk realized the Empire's weakness. They had underestimated the humans' ability to think outside the box, to adapt and survive. The Empire's tactics were predictable, and that was their undoing. In a moment of sheer audacity, Hawk ordered the fleet to split, a move that confused the Imperial commanders. The Valor, battered but still intact, surged toward the Oblivion at full speed, weaving through enemy fire as if it were a bird dodging a storm. The Empire's fleet closed in, determined to stop the human flagship at all costs, but Hawk had something else in mind. With a sudden, calculated move, the Valor slipped beneath the Oblivion's massive guns, using its agility to get in close. Hawk's crew launched a series of devastating attacks at the Oblivion's weak points, its engine core, its communication systems, and its weapons. The ship's shields flared as the first hit landed, but it wasn't enough to stop the relentless assault. The battle raged for hours, but the tide had begun to turn. The Oblivion, once invincible, was showing signs of weakness. The Empire's ships, disoriented and confused by the human attacks, began to falter. The humans' relentless pursuit and clever tactics were chipping away at the Empire's massive fleet, and soon the Oblivion itself was forced to retreat, a scarred and bleeding giant. The humans had done it. They had shattered the reign of the Empire, not with superior technology, but with something far more powerful, their unyielding will to fight and survive. As the dust settled, the Empire's fleet, broken and scattered, began to retreat. The humans had won, but it was only the beginning. The Empire was still powerful, still dangerous. But for the first time in centuries, the balance of power had shifted. The shattered reign of the Empire was no longer a certainty, it was a possibility. And the humans, now more united than ever, were ready to see that through. The galaxy had changed, and so had the humans who fought within it. The Empire, once thought invincible, was now reeling, and Admiral Isabel Hawkey stood at the center of it all, watching as the rebellion she had helped ignite burned brighter than ever before. The human resistance had shattered the myth of the Empire's dominance with their strategic brilliance, their agility, and, above all, their relentless will to survive. Yet, despite their victories, the humans knew they were far from safe. The Empire would not surrender quietly, and its leaders were already plotting their next move, their desperation growing with every passing day. The Oblivion may have retreated, but it was only a temporary setback. The Emperor, bruised but not broken, was assembling an even more dangerous force, a final strike to crush the rebellion once and for all. He had underestimated the humans before, but now he would learn from his mistakes. The Empire's next move was nothing short of terrifying. Massive ships, bigger, faster, and deadlier than anything the humans had faced, were being assembled in secret. Imperial warlords, each eager to restore their honor and power, competed for control of the fleet, each convinced that they alone could defeat the human insurgency. The Oblivion was being repaired and upgraded, its weapons and shields made even more powerful. In the shadows, the Emperor quietly prepared a plan that would eradicate the humans from the galaxy once and for all. His fleet would strike with such overwhelming force that nothing could survive. His enemies would be left in ruins, their hopes dashed forever. But as the Empire's machines of war rumbled to life, the humans were preparing too. They had seen what the Empire was capable of, and they were ready to fight back harder than ever. Admiral Hawk stood at the command center of the Valor, her mind focused and calculating. The recent victory over the Oblivion had given her crew a renewed sense of purpose, but it also made her keenly aware of the looming danger. She knew that the Empire would not let the humiliation go unpunished. She could feel the storm gathering on the horizon, and she knew that it would take everything she had, everything her crew had to survive. The rebellion was no longer about winning small battles. It was about survival. If they lost now, the Empire would wipe them out, and their struggle would have meant nothing. The stakes had never been higher. The Valor and its fleet had gathered near the asteroid belt on the edge of the galaxy, a strategic location where the humans could hide and regroup. They were readying for their next move, and Hawk had a plan, a risky one, but it was the only option left. She had learned from the Empire's patterns, its mistakes, and its arrogance. Now, she would turn their own strengths against them. The Valor would strike first, hitting the Empire's supply lines and cutting off reinforcements. If they could break the Empire's supply chains and cripple their ability to move forces quickly, they might stand a chance. But this mission would be dangerous. The Empire's fleet was vast, and it was closing in on their position. The humans had no time to waste. ASF, the fleet made preparations for the daring strike. Tension hung thick in the air. Every member of the crew knew that this could be their final mission. They had faced death before, but now it felt different, more imminent, more real. Hawkeye knew her crew was ready, but she could sense the fear that lingered beneath their resolve. This would not be a battle fought with pride or glory. It would be a battle fought for survival. They had no choice but to succeed. The attack began with surgical precision. The human ships, hidden in the shadows of the asteroid belt, suddenly sprang to life, darting forward with the speed and agility that had become their trademark. They tore through Imperial defenses like a storm, striking their supply ships with pinpoint accuracy, disabling their weapons, and crippling their engines. The humans hit hard and fast, disappearing into the darkness before the Empire could respond. But the Empire was learning. Soon, the Imperial fleet began to adapt, shifting its formations and deploying advanced countermeasures to counter the humans' swift strikes. The Valor, as always, led the charge, its cannons firing in rapid succession as it tore into the heart of the Imperial fleet. Hawke's heart raced as she watched the battle unfold, her mind working in overdrive. Every move, every calculation had to be perfect. The human ships darted in and out of the chaos, avoiding fire and striking at the Empire's weakest points. The odds were stacked against them, but Hawke could feel the pulse of the battle, the rhythm of the fight. She was in control, she had to be. But just as the humans began to gain ground, something unexpected happened. The Imperial fleet, which had been scattered and disoriented by the human assault, suddenly reformed. The Oblivion reappeared, its engines thrumming with the power of its rebuilt weapons. Behind it, the Imperial warlords had brought their own ships, a fleet more advanced and more deadly than any the humans had ever seen. The Empire had thrown. The Oblivion fired first, a single shot that split the void with the force of a star collapsing in on itself. The blast hit one of the human ships, and in an instant, it was gone, vaporized in the blink of an eye. Hawke's heart sank as the scale of the Empire's power became evident once more. But she refused to back down. She watched as the human ships rallied, weaving through the firestorm, determined not to be crushed. The Valor surged forward, its cannons firing once again, hitting the Oblivion squarely in its vulnerable engine core. For a moment, it seemed as though the Empire's massive flagship would fall. But the Oblivion was built to survive. The humans had underestimated the sheer resilience of the Empire's war machine. The battle raged on for hours, the space between the two fleets a blur of fire and destruction. The Empire's superiority in numbers was undeniable, but the humans refused to surrender. Their tactics, their speed, and their sheer willpower were all that kept them alive. The turning point came when Hawke realized that the Empire had one fatal flaw: their pride. The Imperial commanders, in their desperation to wipe out the humans, had become reckless. They had underestimated the human spirit, and that would be their undoing. With a final, daring move, Hawkeye ordered her fleet to split once again, drawing the Imperial ships into a trap. The humans launched one last wave of devastating attacks, catching the Empire's fleet off guard. One by one, the Imperial ships fell, their commanders too slow to adapt to the humans' unyielding tactics. When the dust finally settled, the humans stood victorious against all odds. The Empire's pride had been shattered, its fleet in disarray. The turning point had come, and it was the humans who had emerged stronger. The Empire had underestimated the power of the human spirit, and in doing so, they had sealed their own fate. But even as the humans celebrated their victory, they knew this was just the beginning. The Empire was still out there, still dangerous. The war was far from over, and the path ahead would be fraught with peril. But for the first time in a long while, the humans could see a glimmer of hope, a hope that the Empire's reign, no matter how long it had lasted, would eventually crumble. The stars burned cold above as the last battle began. Across the black stretch of space, silence hung heavy before the storm. On one side stood what remained of the human resistance, tired, outnumbered, but more determined than ever. On the other, the shattered but still dangerous Empire, holding nothing back in what it knew would be its final attempt to crush the rebellion forever. Admiral Isabel Hawke stood on the bridge of the Valor, her eyes fixed on the massive Imperial fleet forming ahead. She had been through many battles, each one more difficult than the last, but this one was different. This was not just a mission. This was the final stand. Everything they had fought for was now at stake. The galaxy was watching, and the outcome would decide the fate of free life across countless worlds. If they failed here, the Empire would rise again stronger and crueler than before. But if they won, if they could break this last wave, they would light a fire that would never die. The crew around her moved with quiet focus, each person understanding the weight of what was to come. They were not just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone who had ever suffered under the Empire's rule, for every voice that had been silenced, for every world that had been enslaved. And though fear pressed against them like a storm, none of them stepped back. The Empire's final fleet was a terrifying sight, an ocean of metal and fire, led by the reborn Oblivion, now twice as deadly and protected by a wall of warships that filled the horizon. The Emperor himself was aboard it, unwilling to leave the outcome in the hands of anyone else. His hatred for the humans had turned into obsession. They had humiliated him, shattered his image of dominance, and now he would see them wiped from existence. On board the Oblivion, he gave the order for total destruction, no survivors, no second chances. But as the Imperial fleet advanced, Hawke gave her own order. The human ships, scattered like pieces of glass, began to move. They didn't match the Empire's size or power, but they moved with a kind of precision and speed that came only from experience and unity. They had trained for this moment, shaped by fire and failure, and now they struck like lightning. The battle exploded without mercy. Lasers, missiles, and plasma lit up the void, turning darkness into chaos. The humans fought with everything they had. Ships twisted through gaps in the Empire's lines, dodging fire and striking at weak points. They knew they couldn't face the Empire head-on, so they used every trick, every hidden move, every daring gamble they could think of. The Empire answered with overwhelming force. One by one, human ships were hit, torn apart, consumed by fire. The losses were painful, but they kept fighting. No one turned back. No one surrendered. Hawke watched as friends fell, as allies vanished from the screen, but she did not lose focus. Her plan was still in motion, and time was running short. Hidden among the chaos, a small strike team had launched from the Valor toward the Oblivion, a final gamble that could end everything. If they could breach the Emperor's flagship and disable its core, the tide could turn for good. The strike team, led by Commander Elias Vorn, moved like ghosts through the wreckage of the battlefield. They dodged defenses, flew under sensor nets, and boarded the Oblivion without being seen. Inside, they faced the heart of the beast, endless steel corridors filled with guards, traps, and deadly tech. But they kept moving, knowing that every second counted. Each step brought them closer to the control core, and with it, a chance to end the Emperor's rule once and for all. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Hawke knew they were buying time with their lives. The Valor took several direct hits, alarms screaming, hull tearing, but it refused to fall. Hawke stood firm, calling out commands, pushing her crew harder than ever before. She knew what they were doing was impossible. But she also knew that sometimes the impossible could become real if enough people believed it was worth dying for. Inside the Oblivion, Vorn's team finally reached the core. It was guarded by elite soldiers, trained from birth to protect it, but the team fought through with a ferocity born of desperation. Every breath, every shot, was a race against the clock. Vorn placed the charges, while the others held the line, and with a grim nod, he gave the signal. A blinding pulse shook the Oblivion, cutting through its power grid and silencing its guns. Across the battlefield, the mighty flagship trembled. The Empire's fleet faltered, momentarily stunned by the loss of their central command. Hawke saw the moment and seized it. She ordered a full strike, every remaining human ship focusing fire on the stunned Imperial line. The battle turned in a flash. Imperial ships began to break, retreat, and explode under the pressure. The once invincible fleet was falling apart. But victory came at a cost. The Valor was nearly torn in half by a final shot before the Oblivion lost power completely. Fire spread through its decks, and Hawk was thrown against the wall, bleeding but alive. She pulled herself up, looked at the ruined bridge, and gave her last command to push forward, to end it. The human fleet surged ahead, and one by one, the last Imperial warships fell. And then there was silence. The Oblivion drifted in space, broken, its lights gone out. The Emperor, missing or dead, was never heard from again. When the smoke cleared, there was no celebration. The cost had been too high. Friends were gone. Ships were lost. Worlds had bled. But in that silence, something powerful grew. Hope. Not just for humans, but for every species that had lived in fear. The Empire had fallen. Its last stand had failed. The humans had done what no one else believed was possible. They had won not with force alone, but with heart, courage, and unity. And though they had lost much, they had given the galaxy something it had not known in centuries: freedom.